I'm really happy to be here today. And I'll be honest, part of that is because of a terrifying dream I had last night. So in this dream, my dear sweet mother, who is 78 years old, signed me up for a baton twirling contest. And so I was running all over the house looking for this silly baton that I hadn't seen since I was about 5 years old, right? And so when I woke up this morning and realized that instead I'd be here talking to all of you, I was really relieved. So quick show of hands. So people who have worked at a company that has, say, less than 24 or so tech staff and maybe applications that are, say, 4 or 5 years old. Can you raise your hand? Great. So all of you know how much faster you can get things done in an organization of that size. DevOps just comes naturally in a small organization. But picture what happens when that company becomes really successful and grows much bigger. Practices that worked before can begin to break down and become chaotic. So that's what we're going to talk about today, collaborating and containing the chaos. So a little bit about me. Just like Sharon had said earlier, when I first talked to Bridget about coming to talk here at DevOps Days Minneapolis, I was a little bit like, well, why me, right? Seriously, I'm not a site reliability engineer, and I am not going to be able to tell you how to set up a Kubernetes cluster. But I bet you're in the right place if you want to have that conversation today. But I have been in the tech industry my entire career, and yes, that number up there is right. It has been 27 years. And the logos that you see are the companies that I've worked at in various roles. I've been a programmer, back when the title was programmer analyst and not software engineer. I've been a database administrator, and yes, I've been a manager, a director, and a vice president. And I have experience with architecting and operating highly available systems. I've managed data centers globally. I've been the one responsible and worried about whether there was gas in the generator, whether we were doing UPS maintenance, and yeah, even one year making sure that we got the cotton out of the air conditioner so that the data center wasn't running hot. And that's why today at SPS Commerce, we run about 75% of our infrastructure in the cloud. And I also have experience with running global teams and some of the stresses that can occur in technology organizations that are global. So what does that mean for why I'm here? I have a large amount of experience with hands-on experience. I've had root access on servers. I've deployed code to production. I've dealt with those bugs that are in production. And I've restored databases from complete outages. And there was a time when that Set and Awk book from OReilly was my favorite book on my desk. I loved regular expressions. But let's be really honest. Right now, the technology that I use on a daily basis looks a lot like Outlook and Excel and, yeah, even PowerPoint. And the books that are on my desk now are Crucial Conversations and Radical Candor, or RadCan, as the kids like to say. So what does that have to do with DevOps? I have a lot of background experience with managing global operations teams, designing and deploying applications, and organizational change. And DevOps is really about an organizational change for your business that can help you to deliver applications with velocity. And I've been on call rotations my entire career. Again, that's 27 years. So back when getting a page was from an actual pager and not from your phone. And so at 3 a.m. when my teams get called and there's major production outages, I eventually get a call as well. But then I'm the one at 10 a.m. who is talking to our customers about why our systems were down and what we're doing to make sure that we get things fixed. So what has been successful for me at SPS Commerce is to take my development background along with my operational experience and to bring in a willingness to embrace DevOps practices. So I'm here to tell you that DevOps can be done in the enterprise and that there's 3 critical components to making sure that happens: to collaborate, to have data, and to embrace your operational best practices. But first, a little bit about SPS Commerce. because a lot of you probably have no idea what we do. We're just not a household name. SPS is a cloud-based retail supply chain network with over 70,000 customers in more than 60 countries. We have applications in fulfillment and assortment, sourcing, supplier onboarding, and analytics. And we are a solution company that brings the people, the process, and the technology together to solve real problems for businesses. We have tech staff across the globe, so it goes back to that global teams, folks in the United States, in Canada, in Ukraine, in Australia, and India. And our applications transact over 1 billion B2B documents on an average daily basis. And that number can double during our peak season. Like many companies, we have a documented mission and vision. And in that mission, it specifically states we want to be the easiest to join and use network. What does that mean? It means that we see a lot of change for new customers that are coming in on a regular basis, and changes within that network. Our company has had to scale dramatically over the past few years, and we are the largest SaaS product in this market. So the strength of our product is our retail network, which is made up of a wide variety of companies, from retailers to third-party logistics firms and suppliers and grocers and more. We are at the hub of those connections, and it's up to SPS to make sure that those connections have good communications between them, and we are managing all of the change in there. In 2017, we managed 4,961 changes in that network. SPS sees constant change, and I've been in the tech industry for a long time and seen a lot of change in companies, but never like at SPS Commerce. And it's specifically because of that constant change and the retail network that bringing DevOps practices to play is so important at SPS. We've had some really fantastic revenue growth since we went public in 2001, 69 quarters of revenue growth. And that's critical when you think about what does it mean to the underlying systems that drive that revenue growth. Our applications and infrastructure have had to double their capacity every year or two, and that's pretty massive. So these are some really great company facts about SPS, and part of the reason that I started there back in November of 2013 was because of this and the great people that I met. And by the way, I started on Cyber Monday of that year. Okay, so enough with the company spiel. If your business is in retail, or if you're just a really avid online shopper, you know that Cyber Monday is kind of a big deal in retail, right? So, what was I thinking about joining on Cyber Monday? I mean, really, I had experience with the tech frenzy of Black Friday and Cyber Monday with my 13 years of experience at the e-commerce company Digital River, and so I should have known better. I should have just said, nope, I need another week, I'm still digesting my turkey, or how about I start on January 1st, that'd be really great. But no, I actually started on the biggest day of the year for SPS Commerce, the day when we have the most document volume going through our fulfillment product. So let me tell you a little bit about that first day. So here I am, I'm sitting with human resources, filling out all the paperwork. You know you've done this before yourself. So you fill out, you read the corporate handbook, and you have to sign that you've read the corporate handbook. And then you read the security policy, and you have to sign that you'll abide by the security policy. And then you fill in all your beneficiaries for your insurance, and there I am, my hand is literally hovering over the page. And in walks our CTO, Jamie Thingelstad, and he is punching away at this iPad like he is just angry at it. And he might have said hello. I do not remember if he said hello. What I do recall is he said, "Worst blankety blank day ever for SPS. We have been down for 24 hours." Remember, my hand is hovering. And so I thought about it for a little bit, and I signed anyway. So that's our version of chaos, right? And it was a chaotic day, and honestly, a pretty chaotic week. And in chaos, there is opportunity. And there's an opportunity for really good change. And so what this major incident gave our team was an ability to make that change and an ability to change how we worked. And so let's talk a little bit about how SPS brought in DevOps practices to do that. First, let's start with collaboration. So we had some pretty challenging conflicts or challenges that I told you about. First of all, we had major communications problems. My second week of work at SPS, I'm talking to one of the database administrators about their Oncall because, I've been on call and I've been a DBA. So I asked him about it, and he's really frustrated. He says, I get this page every single night, and it wakes me up about a query that keeps failing, and I don't know why development never fixes it. And so I asked him, who do you talk to when that occurs? And he said, well, I have no idea who in development to talk to. And the sad thing is, that developer was just a few cubes away from him. So the communication was pretty bad. And that brings us to finger pointing. So when something like that happens, a major incident, people want to blame someone, right? Especially when you have bad communications and silos between your teams. And so Dev was thinking, well, if Ops just hadn't made that change right before Cyber Monday, we'd be fine. And Ops is like, well, Dev never fixes their application, so we had to make that change. And so there's just no empathy between teams. And so that's really bad. And then finally, we had a lot of heroes, especially in Ops. Those people who worked hours and days, actually, to fix that major incident. Everyone loves a hero, right? But unfortunately, a hero mentality, it rewards the wrong thing. It rewards the complete destruction of your work-life balance instead of rewarding the proactive work that makes sure that doesn't occur. So how do you fix this? We had to bring in a culture of collaboration. And culture is a really, really hard thing to do, but it's at the core of DevOps. A culture are the beliefs and the attitudes and the behaviors that your team brings to work every single day. And something like this floor layout can really help that. It can define and it can reinforce your culture of collaboration. When we have issues today, we can bring Dev and Ops together really quickly. And we can give them the data right at their hands in order to have the collaborative discussions about what's going on. But let's be honest, an open floor plan is not going to give you DevOps, right? Instead, you have to make sure that your Dev and Ops teams are working together really, really closely. And you can do that well by having embedded teams. So everyone understands what cross-functional embedded team is, or you've heard of two-pizza teams and how amazingly productive they are, right? But the reality is they can be really hard to do in an enterprise. There's historical structures that can make that difficult. There's reporting lines. So Dev and Ops have been built up in many enterprises for years, and they may even report to different C-level executives. You have budget constraints, and you have legacy applications that can make it difficult. But it's really critical to find the times when you can do those embedded teams. Why? Because you have a clarity of focus on what you need to do every single day. Both Dev and Ops are all working on the same principles, making sure these applications can deliver product and that they're doing so in a very good operations manner. SPS had the opportunity to do this when we had an acquisition, and that acquisition for a communications layer. It allowed us to bring in some new staff and to bring other staff into a dedicated embedded team. But that can be very difficult to do across your entire organization. Why? You just may not have the money to do it. It's really expensive in an enterprise to be having every team in an embedded team. Also, every team probably doesn't need embedded operations staff. You might not be at a life cycle where you have a lot going on, a lot of change. It might just be a lot of feature change to that application. And so you'd have some pretty bored ops people. And if you're looking to have your developers do all the operations work, some of them can do that, absolutely, and some want to. But the reality is, a lot of people just really want to focus on a particular criteria or a particular technology. And that might be, I want to do a lot of development or I want to do a lot of ops. And so finding someone who wants to do both can be really difficult. And finally, you have some really shared experts who are good to have in a shared ops team. Think about that Oracle DBA who really understands how to tune that database well and is practically a magician at it, right? You don't want that person to be embedded onto a team so they can't work on others. And in fact, they'd probably be bored at it. So what's the answer? The answer is ad hoc embedded teams. And what does this mean? It means you have teams that bring in ops staff as they're needed. So picture you have a new application that's being built, or you have a major change to an application. That's a great time to bring your teams together to make sure you're building it for operational viability. And then when that project goes to production, you can send those people back to the shared ops team, or you can have them go back onto a different embedded team. So another way that SPS helps to ensure that we have collaboration between our staff is with community. We have a strong emphasis on giving back to community. In the communities that we're in, our headquarters in Minneapolis here, and in other cities as well. And that also includes our tech community. So we do things like host DevOps meetups, right? And other meetups as well. We have student hackathons where we host it at our space, and we also bring in mentors. And that's really important to us. So how do we bring that excitement into SPS? We do so by realizing that our organization is also a community, and we can replicate some of those same things that are done in the external tech community inside of SPS Commerce. So we do things like we host monthly tech meetups. They look a lot like the DevOps days meetups as well. And we have an annual tech jam, like you can see there. And it looks a lot like a conference, the technical conference that we're at right now, where we have people from our company give talks about what's going on, and we bring in vendors as well. And that has a second optional workshop day where vendors are teaching some different technologies. So there's a lot of excitement around that as well. And we have things called guilds. These are self-organizing groups of people who are coming together to talk about a topic that really interests them. And some of those topics are monitoring and observability, data science, security, network intelligence, UI. We even have what we call a breakfast club, which is an intro to programming, so our tech staff can teach others in the organization about programming. And then we have some fun guilds like board games and book club. So now let's talk a little bit about the power of data and how you can use that to collaborate. This is one of the most important graphs for our fulfillment product. Each of the lines on this graph represents a way that our customers use our fulfillment product to transform their data. And by seeing this data together, it can be very powerful. Why? Because you can see quickly where are the norms in this data. You can also see when there's inconsistencies. And you can see when data points go above thresholds where you might want to take an automated action, like paging the tier 1 resources, which goes to tier 2, and eventually, yeah, I probably get a page if it goes, if that number gets bad enough. And you can auto-scale infrastructure as well. So this data, graphed and visualized, is very powerful. This is the first thing I look at every day that I walk in the office. It's right in our ops space. And many other people do as well. And development and operations can come together to collaborate over this data because you just can't refute it. It helps you to understand where your issues are on a regular basis. So let's talk a little bit now about the time-honored battle between dev and ops and the major wall that can go up. And why is that? It's about goals, right? Dev has a goal of changing things. Let's get some product features out there as fast as we can. And dev thinks ops just doesn't want to change anything, right? But really, ops is saying, please, please don't break anything because I don't want to get a call tonight. And then ops does things like talk about key performance indicators or KPIs. Let's talk about CPU and memory and infrastructure availability and uptime. And dev says, I really don't care, or what about those KPIs? What are they? And so that's very frustrating. So how do you fix that? How do you get common goals? Well, you create DevOps KPIs, right? You talk about things that you both care about. What are some of those? Application availability. That's a pretty obvious one, right? Everyone here probably talks about this already. And then there's some less obvious ones. What about days since last code deploy? Why should operations care about the last time a development team deployed code? Well, if they haven't deployed code for a while, there's a few things that are probably going to happen next time it does get deployed. There might be a lot of changes in that deployment. And maybe they don't automate those code deploys because it's so infrequent. And that's pretty risky. So it's really important to look at this data point. Also, how about deployment success rate? Well, you probably have to define what a success rate first, right? Does it just mean, did the deployment go out with any issues? Did it mean there weren't any breaking changes? So making sure that there's an understanding of what does success rate mean. But this is also important because you can talk about how good you are at doing this. How about incidents in the last 90 days? Being able to look at those incidents and talk collaboratively about where we should be making changes really opens up the dialogue. And finally, mean time to recover. So if the infrastructure or application fails in some way, how long does it take? If you have a breaking change in a deployment, how long does it take you to either roll forward or fix that? Okay, so you have the data visualized, you have the DevOps KPIs, but it can be really hard to understand how your services come together in an enterprise. You probably have a lot of services, dozens of services. At SPS, we do, right? So how do you talk about that when you might have a development team that's working on one or two services that are part of a larger whole? Visualizing it can be very, very powerful. So last year, we brought Dev and Ops team together in an ad hoc embedded team and asked them to do this visualization. We used the tool Visceral from Netflix, and this was really powerful. But what was interesting, where there's some ops staff who said, well, why are we doing this? I already know what this looks like. I know how these services interact. And of course they do, because they're getting paged when that main service in the middle goes down, right? But Dev, who's working on some of those services on the outside, may not understand that. And so having that common dialogue about what does our service infrastructure look like is so powerful. So finally, I'm going to talk about embracing your operational best practices. And all of you may not agree with this. It sounds kind of weird. We're talking about DevOps was not about embracing your operational best practices. But at enterprises, you have years of doing this, right? Some of you are doing things like ITIL, and that's okay. You can't throw away everything in order to implement DevOps. Instead, you need to augment them. Change management. You probably see this and your muscles clench up and you think, oh my goodness, really? She wants to talk about change management? Some people even say, you don't do change management in DevOps, right? Well, okay, we're talking about an enterprise here, and you've probably seen change management that just is really slow and hard, right? So picture this. You have a change advisory board that meets once a week. You have to put your request for change or RFC in the day before by like 3 p.m. or something, and if you missed it, oh no, it's 3:30. You probably have to wait another week for it to get reviewed and approved, or maybe even longer. That is really frustrating, right? But why is that in place? Enterprises have that in place for a couple of good reasons. Because you probably have applications that have high availability requirements, right? Or you have the wonderful regulatory compliance of things like SOC 2 and SOX and ISO and pick your alphabet soup compliance. But, so you can't throw it away. Instead, you need to augment it. Augment that change management to make sense for the applications that it should, right? So picture a couple ends of the spectrum on change management. You have that change. We're going to do a database example because I'm a DBA, right? So you have this centralized database in your enterprise that dozen or so services all use, and you need to upgrade it. And even if your DBAs are awesome and they're able to get that upgrade to a few minutes, moving over to another database, that's still an outage, right? And what if that doesn't go well? You're going to have a couple hours maybe of a massive problem while you try to deal with this upgrade that didn't go well. So that's a change that you're probably going to want to talk about pretty extensively over a few weeks. Make sure everyone knows that it's happening. And it's going to look probably a lot like that standard change advisory board meeting. But then on the other side, you have a cloud-native application that has blue-green deployment. It has automated ticket creation and documentation. It has KPIs defined in order to discuss what does the success look like. On that end of the spectrum, you need to give a lot of flexibility to that. And there's no reason to be talking about that and approving it in a change meeting, right? In that case, you're probably just talking about the data, about how those applications are doing. So SPS is working now on build-deploy classifications that clearly articulate the maturity level requirements for services so that you can self-approve to put changes right into production. So there's a lot of things between those two examples, but to make sure that your change management is augmented for the services is really important. So what does that do for us? If you have a lightweight change management practice and you can change more rapidly, right? At SPS, we like to talk about the fact that teams that ship more win more. So picture you have a team that can deploy to production 20 times a month reliably. That team has more chances to win and to get it right than a team that deploys, say, just once a month. And why is that? Well, if they're deploying 20 times a month, they probably automated it. Who's going to manually do that 20 times a month? No one, right? And they probably also have a really good understanding of the fact that if they have an issue, they can roll forward with another change very quickly. That other team who is doing this once a month, maybe they haven't automated it. And so deploying and shipping more frequently is really important. At SPS over the last 2 years, we've more than doubled our monthly changes into production. And we've done that because of a lightweight change management and DevOps practices. So what do we do in these change advisory board meetings if we're not all looking at every single change that's going into place and reviewing it and approving it or not approving it? Well, we talk about the data. We're collaborating on data because that's what's really important. So our meetings look a lot like this. Customer success will come in and they'll talk about all the contacts that we've had from customers, how many calls and emails and chats. And then we tie that to the incident data that we've had over the last week and the change data. And we look at trends, right? And we also look at data points like this, change success rate. So why is this important? We talked a little bit earlier about the DevOps KPI around deployment success rate and defining that. So how successful are applications at deploying their code? Do they have issues? Do we need to roll forward a new change? Did it put in a breaking change? Did we have to try and roll back, which is really actually pretty impossible, right? You can't go back to the state that it was before. So this is the thing that we talk about in our change advisory board meeting. And then another operational best practice is to report and distribute data that talks about your application health. So we've taken those DevOps KPIs that we have, and we're building an operational confidence report so that we can collaborate over data that really matters to both dev and ops. Teams are able to use this data to drive continuous improvement. So where are we now after all of that? So 2013, I talked about this terrible data that we had. Because of bringing in DevOps practices, using the power of data, collaborating across that data, and embracing our operational best practices, we've been able to dramatically turn that around and had a hugely successful Cyber Week in 2017. In fact, we were able to almost double our document throughput on Cyber Monday that year, while keeping our performance on par with a normal business day. That's pretty powerful. And the interesting thing is, DevOps made that possible, right? Everything I've talked about so far is why. But I didn't have to sell DevOps to the business. It was pretty easy. Why? Because we were doing what was right for the business. We were making changes that allowed us to deliver product with velocity, that allowed us to make sure we had a strong collaboration between teams. And that's really important. So there was simply no other way to make this happen than to bring in DevOps. So I've shared with you the journey that SPS took to bring DevOps into the enterprise. Think about what this means for you and your companies. Imagine what it would be like if you could collaborate more, if you had a culture of collaboration, if you had embedded teams and a community. What would it look like if you made data a common language between your teams? If you graphed everything and put it on a shared display? If you had DevOps KPIs? If you visualized the interaction between your services? And how can you embrace and augment your operational best practices? Things like change management for DevOps, ship more to win more, and confidence reporting. Because DevOps in the enterprise is possible. Thank you.